Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Namaste, everyone. So, for this week and next week, I want to talk about the way of the peacemaker, following Gandhi's four-step peace process. I plan to do 3 of the 4 steps this time, and then the really gigantic step of Satyagraha we'll cover next time. It's a very interesting subject for me because when I was 17, I had certainly heard of Gandhi and seen a little bit of film of him, Mahatma Gandhi, but I had not in any way been introduced to his thought. Yet, when I was 17, I rejected nation states. After all, my grandfather and my great uncle Jack lived through their being in France during World War One, and my parents lived through World War Two, and then the Vietnam War was ongoing, and I had come to the conclusion that nation states were a cause of war and somewhat of a root of evil. And I wrote an extremely long essay for S-level history. That's kind of like AP history, I guess, um, in which I proposed an entire system of world government based on grassroots up direct democracy. And I really developed all by myself as a hot-headed, in many ways quietly rebellious 17-year-old, a plan not dissimilar from Gandhi's. So that is really interesting. So today we're going to talk about the first 3 steps: Swaraj, independence, uh, Swadeshi, service, or being rooted in the locality, and Sarvodaya, universal welfare. Let's see if we can cover those 3 today. So, starting with Swaraj, which Gandhi wrote is the abandonment of the fear of death. When you demand Swaraj, you don't want Swaraj for yourself alone, but for your neighbor too. So Swaraj means some kind of autonomy, some kind of sense of independence, but on an individual level, I think more so than independence. Swa, self, Raj, rule, is just the same word as auto, nomos, as meaning being in your own ruler. So autonomy. So in this principle of Swaraj, the first step of bringing about peace is finding one's own autonomy and helping others at an individual level to achieve autonomy. Let's think about it. In a feudal system, people do not have autonomy. People who are enslaved are granted zero autonomy. People who are imprisoned do not have autonomy. And from the standpoint of Marx, people who he would call as wage slaves, people bound to that payment for their labor, also do not have a full measure of autonomy and do not truly get to reap the fruits of their own labor. So another word would be self-reliance, but to be very careful because we are all interconnected. At a more political level, yes, Swaraj refers to home rule, independence, i.e., not being part of an empire, not being part of a colonial system, not being colonized. Uh, it means being independent of government control, independent of the control of a foreign power, as the people of India were for 200 years under the, not the Swaraj, but the British Raj, ruled by another distant small land who was able to enrich itself through the resources of India, um, but also not to be controlled by a national government, to live in a system where everyone has the freedoms that we see in the Bill of Rights, that we're not under any kind of totalitarian rule. So also economic freedom. For Gandhi, Swaraj meant the sum total of the Swaraj of individuals. So everyone has to be free, not just you, but the poorest among us need to enjoy this freedom and this autonomy. And with that self-rule on a spiritual level, we are also talking about self-restraint, being able to govern ourselves, not being ruled by our impulses. Gandhi says, in this structure composed of innumerable villages, we're talking about India, which still at that time was a village-based society, even in Britain. In my early childhood, I grew up in the tail end of a village-based society. I grew up in a small market town that was the hub of the surrounding villages, which did include Stilton and Long Clawson, famous for Stilton cheese. In this structure composed of innumerable villages, there will be ever widening, never ascending circles. Life will not be a pyramid with the apex sustained by the bottom, but it will be an oceanic circle whose center will be the individual, always ready to perish for the village ready to perish for the circle of villages, until at last the whole becomes one life composed of individuals never aggressive in their arrogance but ever humble, sharing the majesty of the oceanic circle of which they are integral units. Therefore, the outermost circumference will not wield power to crush the inner circle, but will give strength to all within and derive its own strength from it. Gandhi does mention that people may think he's being super utopian, so why bother? But he says, even if we can never completely realize this vision, we should continue to strive for it. It also reminds me of the Shambhala teachings about the mandala, the balance of center and fringe. The center is the governing body or the government. The fringe is all of us. You don't want the center to be too strong, so it's crushing the fringe. You don't want the fringe to be so strong that the center loses cohesion. You need a beautiful balance of center and fringe. I think it's very similar. Well, my friends, we are currently being threatened with the exact opposite of Swaraj. You may not all have heard of the Neo-reactionary movement, but this is a strong current of thought among the billionaire tech bros who are trying to take over the world because they've got the money to do that. It's the opposite of authoritarianism, fascism, totalitarianism, and it's the opposite of illiberal democracy, because in illiberal democracy, all we do is have elections, but democracy requires more than elections. It requires an educated populace, a populace who have their basic needs met. It requires free speech, free assembly, freedom of the press, an independent judiciary. It requires these basics to have democracy be actually democracy and not just a sham. So let's talk a little bit more about the neo-reactionary movement, because we're seeing this being implemented before our eyes by Doge. Just as the young brown shirts would ride into a town or a city to destroy the Jewish businesses and arrest people. So now the young, the under 25 techies recruited by Elon Musk for Doge are doing a chainsaw job. You saw Musk brandishing the chainsaw, doing a chainsaw job on our civil servants and our federal institutions, our national parks, our ability to help other countries remain stable by seeing that they have food and healthcare opportunities, our ability to know when the next hurricane is coming, or even if it's going to rain tomorrow. That's beloved Noah. Some people are saying we don't need Noah now, we get the weather on our phone. That's like saying abolish cows now that milk is in the supermarket. Okay. The weather on your phone does come from Noah. So this this chainsaw job and this Doge thing that's so like horrifying and overwhelming to us is part of a movement. And this is called the Neo-reactionary movement. It's also called the Dark Enlightenment. In many ways, it is connected to the traditionalist movement that Steve Bannon is part of, but without the spiritual initiation component. In traditionalism, it's wished to abolish uh, the Enlightenment, to abolish democracy, and of course, scientific thinking is part of the Enlightenment, vaccinations are part of the Enlightenment, public health is part of the Enlightenment, democracy, liberal democracy is part of the Enlightenment. Traditionalists do want to get back to a world of kings and hierarchy. And it's looking to me a little bit like neo-reactionary is traditionalism without the urge to spiritual initiation that's part of traditionalism. So dark enlightenment is kind of like reverse the enlightenment. Dismantle democracy in favor of a centralized corporate or monarchic rule. Now, if you are a fan of Margaret Atwood, you might have read the Mad Adam trilogy. Maybe you've only been reading the Handmaid's Tale stuff, but uh, read the Mad Adam trilogy. She foresaw all of it. She foresaw the abolition of democracy in favor of corporatocracy, one might say. Um, Corporate rule by the corporation or by a monarch. Some of the billionaire tech bros who are propounding this are Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin. Land has argued that democracy leads to societal decline. So he wants societies to be run like corporations. We should have the competent elites at the top to boss everyone else around. Um, we don't have to have elections in the corporation. Why should we in the country? And Curtis Yarvin has also extensively written about his vision to replace democracy with something far more efficient. an autocratic regime controlled by a CEO and a technocratic elite. So these are the dangers that we face and why we have to really deeply root ourselves in Gandhi's concept of Swaraj, autonomy for me, autonomy for those who are downtrodden, who have less than me, but we need to live in autonomy. Swaraj, although, is also not nationalistic, uh, because Gandhi, like me, is leery of the nation state. I have to say, I've somewhat changed my views about the nation state over the succeeding decades to the extent that I have seen that while nationalism is incredibly dangerous among the nations that have been colonizers and empire builders, I understand some urge to flag wearing and national pride among those formerly colonized nations. The problem is a lot of them are nations that were put together. Their boundaries were drawn by the colonizers. So, uh, and redrawing those boundaries is not going to necessarily lead to peace. I can't cover everything, all of these big ideas, but know that Swaraj is not either nationalistic. Um, then I found a wonderful article called Eco Swaraj versus Global Eco Catastrophe by Ashish Kotari. And he's shared some really beautiful ideas. So, Swaraj really refers to direct democracy, just as I had it designed in my S level history paper when I was 17. I had a whole plan for circles of direct democracy, um, with the abolition of the nation states, and people would be living more in terms of regions. The units would go as big as you could have direct democracy in my plan. And then all of those regions would come together to elect someone to represent them in the world government, which was part of my plan. I just wanted to abolish war forever, which meant abolishing nation states. Um, so this is what Ashish Kothari is saying: direct or radical political democracy. We need to establish processes of decision-making power at the smallest unit of human settlement, like our city council, um, our local council. I have to say, my mum thought being regional rather than national was an absolutely terrible idea because she said, but I'm in Suffolk and East Anglia is so conservative, and I wouldn't want to be stuck with that, said by the former card carrying communist and anarchist as she had signed up for after the war when she was 17. It runs in the family. Um, so every human should have the right capacity and opportunity to participate in this direct democracy. From these basic units, outwards growth is envisioned, this is Ashish, to larger levels of governance that are accountable and answerable to these basic units, building from the ground up. Exactly what 17-year-old me designed. Political decision making at larger levels is taken by eco-regional or biocultural regional institutions, hence my East Anglia rules, which respect ecological and cultural linkages and boundaries, so they challenge current political boundaries, including those of nation states. I wish I could become friends with Ashish Kotari because we've had a lot of ideas in common. The role of the state eventually becomes minimal and is limited to facilitating the connection of peoples and initiatives across larger landscapes. It carries out welfare measures only when the basic units, direct and eco-regional democracy, are not able to do so. So, wow, really interesting. Uh, watch out. We must fight against King Musk taking over our country. That is the plan, that he will be installed as our king. We must fight to preserve our Bill of Rights because remember, this is what it requires. For peace, we must have Swaraj. The next step of our peace process is Swadeshi. Gandhi says Swadeshi is service. And if we understand its nature, we shall simultaneously benefit ourselves, our families, our country, and the world. Swadeshi means one's own land. Again, this being regional. I also have loved the concept of indigenization. Of course, there are those people who truly are indigenous. Um, we have among us our native people, our indigenous people. For someone like myself, uh, who is when I was asked to write down my ethnicity and I could choose my own, I wrote Jewish, English, and Black. Jewish, English, and African, or Jewish, English, and Black, because that's the topmost three. So I'm definitely not a native to anywhere. And I have really made an effort to indigenize myself here in the foothills at the base of the Rocky Mountains, here in this beautiful place that is Boulder. Uh, we strive to indigenize ourselves by connecting with the landscape, honoring it, talking to the land. Swadeshi is an eternal, this Gandhi says, Swadeshi is an eternal principle whose neglect has brought untold grief to mankind. It means production and distribution of articles manufactured in one's own country, not necessarily meaning nation state, region, regional, local. It is the spirit which restricts us to the use and service of our immediate surroundings, says Gandhi, to the exclusion of the more remote. That includes when formerly colonized countries need to try to use their own indigenous institutions, the native nations using their own indigenous institutions rather than aping those of their colonizers. It also means buy local, support local business, buy local. And then Ashish Kotari, who I wish I could become good friends with, talks about economic democracy, establishing or strengthening processes in which local communities, the producers and the consumers, have control over the means of production, distribution, exchange, and markets. This is the absolute opposite of global capitalism. Global capitalism where businesses get moved here and there, people lose their jobs. Um, the most basic goods are fungible. So the most basic things like wheat is fungible. In other words, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's traded on a global market. Uh, Ashish Kotari says open localization is a key principle in which the local regional economy provides for all basic needs. And we want to minimize our dependence on global trade to what is truly necessary and what will still safeguard local self-reliance. Back when I was quite young, maybe, I don't remember, 19, 20, but when I was having archaeology is one of my important hobbies and obsessions. I did get a chance to go to Grimes Graves, the flint, Paleolithic flint mine. And what I learned when I was there was the extent of global trade that occurred in Paleolithic times. They have found flints from Grimes graves all the way to Siberia, and salt was traded all the way from Siberia to the British Isles. Obviously, it would have taken maybe generation upon generation, but in other words, when someone else has got that special thing that you don't have, that is what is supposed to be international trade. You want that wine, you want that olive oil, you you want that saffron that you can't grow here. And you can trade some of your surplus and you can get those special things from other places, but not so much about fungibles. Um, Nature, natural resources, and this is Ashish again, other important elements that feed into the economy are governed as the commons. And in Gandhi's view, private property is minimized or disappeared, and non-monetized relations of caring and sharing regain their central importance. I know this is a far cry. It is a socialist view. Um, it is a socialist view. Um, I was raised pacifist and I was raised socialist. I've in many ways grown beyond some of the ideas of the pacifism or developed it, but not really grown beyond these socialist ideas. Um, Local control of the means of production and distribution, um, the sense of the commons. That is something that I'm kind of rooted in, growing up in the tail end of the village society in Britain. Even though there was that terrible feudal side, there also was the commons. Like literally, there was a village green or a common, which was the common land for everyone to share. There were commons and there was a common good. And as global capitalism develops into like hyper, ultra, mega capitalism, that sense of the commons is completely lost. And we cannot care for the earth because everything is open to exploitation. And that brings us to Sarvodaya. Really, Daya is compassion, compassion for all. Sarvodaya is universal welfare. Gandhi says, the concentration of blood at one spot is harmful to the body, and the concentration of wealth at one place is the undoing of a nation. I think we're all seeing this as this near this neo-reactionary movement is also entirely oligarchic. And if we are to be ruled by the oligarchs, we will lose our autonomy. We will lose our local economy. Our ability we will be supposed to get everything from Amazon, right? We'll lose our whole local economy, and people are going to be impoverished. If we're going to have to abolish SNAP and cut back on Medicaid and abolish free school meals for children that truly need them, otherwise they're going to go hungry. If we're going to do this to make tax cuts for the super rich, we are truly headed for what Gandhi would call the nation's undoing. Now there are, I think the latest count is 8 billion, but I could be wrong. Um, is there really enough for everyone? Gandhi believed that the earth provides enough to satisfy everyone's needs, but not everyone's greed. In his vision, uh, no one will have that greed for limitless acquisition of material wealth and luxurious living. And Gandhi coined the phrase simple living and high thinking. We can earn a dignified living by doing honest work. So those are the first three steps. Swaraj, autonomy, which is the complete opposite of the neo-reactionary movement that currently threatens the democracy that we do have, and that is actually a more radical direct democracy than the Swadeshi service, beginning by serving our next door neighbor, our local people, and it extends out in concentric circles to encompass the whole world. It comes with economic democracy and is the opposite of global capitalism. And then Sarvodaya, universal welfare, caring for everyone. No one needs to have 10 slices of the cake. No one needs to eat the whole cake and throw a few crumbs at the rest of us. We must trust that if we take care of our environment and we take care of others, there is one piece of cake for everybody. So next time we'll go a little deeper as we'll delve into the big one, Satyagraha. See you next time. Okay.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivadano